So it was in this very room on the 10th of October 2014 that myself and Neil Mottershead were visiting the old Valerians Lodge, and we were due to watch a chap be passed to the second degree. And he joined the lodge about 3 months previously to this. And it got to about 5 minutes before the lodge was due to open, and he still hadn't arrived. And the DC and some of the senior guys went out, and we could hear them making phone calls, and they couldn't get hold of the chap. And we got to talking, there was half a dozen or so of us that were in the corner just behind me now, about exactly what support this guy had. And it turned out that the guy that had proposed him into the lodge had been unwell, and he hadn't made any contact. And none of the senior guys were able to get hold of him. And they'd sent in the summons and just presumed that he was going to attend the meeting. And they essentially opened the lodge, went through the minutes, did the risings, and we were down in the bar 10 minutes later. And it was at that stage that myself and Neil started to talk about a support network or club to allow not just younger, but actually newer Freemasons to have some sort of mentoring within the province.
That's where the kind of conversation then grew to the point where we were then saying we should contact all the lodges that meet in Watford and find out their EAs, fellow crafts, master masons that have just been raised, and invite them once a month. We all have drinks, whether it be somewhere different or somewhere or at the actual Masonic temple. And that allows everyone to then talk and interact with different people.
So myself and Neil had spent a reasonable amount of time propping up the bar that night, talking about the ideas for the club. And essentially, I forgot all about it. A week or so later, I got a call from Neil to say, do you remember that idea that we've had? I've spoken to someone from Province and we've got organised a meeting with them. And I'm thinking, what idea was that? So we now jump forward to November in 14, and the province had put us onto Darren Bending. And at this stage, I'd never met Darren before, but he was doing special projects within the province. And we started an email exchange with myself and Neil and Darren.
Our first initial conversation was very much more oh, hang on, we do know each other. Turns out Darren had been at my initiation meeting, so he was there as a visitor from someone from the province, which was great because I'd met him and interacted with him already. And then deeper than that, my dad was at my initiation meeting, and turns out Darren and my dad actually grew up together when they were teenagers. So there was already a nice basic rapport that was there.
While speaking to Darren, I think we all realised that rather than a Watford-based club, what we actually needed was something within the province.
Darren said, that's a great idea, but it could be bigger.
With the email exchange with Darren, he was very enthusiastic about the whole idea, and indeed he'd been part of another province's light blues club, and so he saw the need to have a support network for younger Masons.
He was a very active member of the province, which was great for us because he knew the right people to speak to. He kind of had been involved with the light blues clubs when he was in Middlesex. And because he's so active and so kind of available within the province, he then took our conversations to the provincial office and said, this is what we're thinking of doing. And the provincial office said, that's a great idea. We definitely want the focus on helping newer Masons.
Darren introduces the idea of bringing in another new young guy, Tom Golds, who'd been involved in the communicational side within the province. And he started to be part of the email chain.
Tom at that time was helping with Darren and other people within the province with different things. Very, very active, passionate person who I'm pretty sure the conversations between Darren and Tom were Darren explained the idea, Tom went, that's amazing, let's make it happen.
So I got an email from Darren with Neil Mottershead's number. And Darren was very much, you've got to get things done straight away. So I was driving home, I pulled up at the big Tesco in Stevenage, saw that the email had come through and thought, right, I'll call him as I'm walking around Tesco. Call him, it connects to the Bluetooth in my car, I'm scrambling around looking for my headphones, realise I can't find my headphones, but actually the conversation I was having with Neil was really important. We were agreeing on so many of the points that we thought that the club would be useful to address. We both saw the problems that existed within the province at the time, that there was a lack of engagement for the newer members, that something needed to be done. So rather than getting out the car, I sat in the car park of Big Tesco in Stevenage, talking about the future of Freemasonry.
All have a group chat going on, and it was very much a, let's all get together. We hadn't met Tom hadn't met us, and we just kind of wanted to sit down because we've got these basic ideas and everything now. So we wanted to have an official meeting.
We got an email from Darren saying that we were going to meet at his house. And in the body of the email, it was his postal address with the instruction, the house with the boat outside.
So I'd picked up Nick. I would have picked up Nick from his house. We were driving over.
And I was following the directions that Darren had sent and communicating these to Neil, turn left here, we need to go down this little road, and then we need to look out for the house with the boat. Boat?
And he'd kind of sold it that there was this boat. But it was just in his driveway, and it didn't look like it had been moved for ages. And I was like, okay, cool, this guy's just got a boat in the middle of Hertfordshire, completely surrounded by sea, which was just odd to have a boat there anyway.
I find the street, and I must drive up and down this street 3 or 4 times until I see this boat. And it wasn't the boat I was imagining, it was a little 2-man tugboat on his driveway. So I find an appropriate place to park, get out the car, walk up to the door, and just as I'm about to knock, the door opens, and there's Darren. He invites me through into the house, and we go through into his kitchen, and there at his kitchen table is Neil Mottershead, Nick Tessier, and Darren's son. So I go in, sit at the empty chair, and Darren starts talking through the agenda of the meeting, starts going through all the key points that we'll be discussing, and then suddenly he stops, goes into this little side room, and comes in with the biggest tray of roast potatoes I've ever seen in my life. He pours them into this bowl that's on the table, and then proceeds to get this bucket of salt and pour it all over these roast potatoes. And then he gives each of us a breakfast beer.
Because I've been drinking for most of the afternoon, I have very little recollection of what was actually said. I do remember that they produced a constitution, which I think I'd read through and agreed to all sorts of stuff. But I do remember that we had the mini Belgian beers, which we then referred to as breakfast beers, and roast potatoes.
That was his snacks for everyone. Big, massive bowl of roast potatoes. And for drinks, mini little beers. Tiny little beers. And that is all I can remember of that meeting, is roast potatoes and mini beers.
My first impressions of Neil, he was energy for days. He would go at 1,000,000 miles per hour. He wouldn't finish a thought before he was moving on to the next thing. Everything was passion, passion, passion.
My genuine first thoughts of Tom when he first came in was me and him are either going to get on very, very well or clash massively, because we are both eccentric, we are both passionate, driven. He came in with a lot of energy, and it was very much this is what it's like to meet me.
My first impression of Tom Golds, and he walks into the room and he's got a very deep, booming voice, and he starts to talk very seriously about all sorts of things. And as he becomes more enthusiastic, his voice goes up and so does his hands. And then we realise actually that he's going to be a really special person when it comes to this club and the way that we can bring things forward.
My first impression of Nick was he was slightly inebriated when we met, but he was full of enthusiasm and joy and just a smile that he wanted to support you. He clearly had and still does have a passion for Freemasonry that is just infectious.
Darren invites us to a meeting of the Middlesex Light Blues Club, and I don't remember a huge amount of the meeting. I think it was a first degree, but what I do remember is Tom turning up in a grey suit, much to the absolute annoyance of Darren.
As we arrive, Neil says, "Where's your suit?" I said, "What do you mean?" I was in my suit from work, a nice next grey suit. And he said, "You've got to wear a black suit, dark lounge suit or Masonic morning dress." I said, "What?"
He looked fabulous, but Darren wasn't happy with the colour.
Back then it was a slim fit, if you can believe it or not. Slim fit next grey suit, wore it, and Darren told me off when we walked into the Masonic Hall. As we worked our way through, we went into the main temple of this place. I didn't know what we were going to see because I hadn't seen the summons. But we sat down front row and we were told this was the Light Blues Club for the province. Looked around. I was a light blue. Neil was a light blue. There's one other light blue on the other side of the room. Everybody else was a dark blue.
Darren explained that the membership for the Middlesex Light Blues Club just rolls on. And you've got people there that are still paying their £5 a year or whatever it is, and then that just goes into a big massive pot. And that's how it is. I fundamentally disagreed with that.
I do remember that during the meeting, I know it was supposed to be a light blues club, but there weren't any light blues.
Conversations after the meeting were very much focused on what we saw. And what we saw was dark blue aprons everywhere. Now this was meant to be like a light blues club, Middlesex Light Blues Club event. And there was about 5 or 6 actual light blue aprons. And the meeting had about 50, 60 people. So that really hit home that it's not just Hertfordshire that's got this problem.
So after the Middlesex Light Blues meeting, we were then at the point of trying to establish a constitution. And the reason that we did that is we needed to open a bank account. And in order to open the bank account, I mean, there are all sorts of hoops that you needed to jump through. And I think they needed 4 of us to turn up half a dozen times in total. But we needed a signed constitution. And there were various emails that went backwards and forwards trying to get this constitution in some sort of shape so that it could be ratified.
Now, this is before we had shared docs or anything like that. So we would share one version of the Constitution via email to the group, and then about an hour later you'd get another version back, but that person wouldn't have highlighted the edits they had made. They would just say V2 attached, and then you would have to go through and try and find where the comma had changed or the clause had been added or whatever it might be. And this went on for weeks. Subtle changes, major changes. And this is when the cracks began to form in the relationships between a few people, where you could really see a difference of direction and opinion, and neither party was going to back down as to what they thought was needed. But what we had all agreed was that we had a deadline to achieve, we were going to get this constitution written, and we were going to submit it to the Provincial Grand Master.
I was sat at the festive board of my mother lodge talking to one of the members about my experience in the Connaught Club. I had been a member there for a number of years and had really enjoyed the type of events and the camaraderie. As we got talking, I explained that I felt Hertfordshire could engage its light blues members in the same type of way. He was a member of the provincial executive and had told me that he had heard of some rumblings of this type of club forming, but he didn't know the details, so he'd go away and come back to me. A few days later, I received an email from him introducing me to Darren Bending. Darren was really warm and friendly and invited me along to a chapter meeting at Mayflower Place. I was pretty apprehensive about attending this chapter meeting. I hadn't been a member of chapter for very long, and this was my first time visiting. I had also had an email exchange with Darren, but I didn't know who he was, and so as I arrived, I walked in and spotted the 3 young Masons in the corner and thought, well, I better go and introduce myself to them. And it happened to be Nick, Neil and Tom.
So the first time I met Dan was at this chapter meeting, and in comes this big, bald bloke, and you think, oh, comes over, shakes your hand, and again, that smile, just a really genuinely good guy.
There was a slight worry that he might not be as loud and as eccentric as kind of Tom, myself and Nick, but he still kind of fit in well with us.
What we begun to realise quite quickly was that he was as passionate about new and young Freemasonry as we were, that he wanted to help people explore their Freemasonry and discover what lies beyond and some of the mysteries. He didn't let on to any of the esoteric stuff that he's deeply into until later, but it was a fantastic first meeting, and it gave us the opportunity to realise that amongst the 4 of us, we had a shared ideal. We then went through to go and get changed, and we're focused more on how we're putting on our Royal Arch regalia. Are we putting the sash on the right way? Are our jewels the right way? Where am I? What am I doing? In we go to this chapter meeting, and we hadn't seen the summons for it. It turns out it was an installation, and the 4 of us were going to get kicked out. So we got kicked out, but it gave us the perfect opportunity to bond for the first time, just the 4 of us, and really start to share the ideas that we thought that the club could go in and the direction it should travel on. And it turns out we were all in agreement with each other.
But it kind of just reinforced the fact that we as light blues and young members of any other order need to be kind of together, because otherwise they're not going to go to these meetings. And we learned a lot while we were there, but that we got to build that rapport and that relationship and that brotherly fraternal love that we all have.
My main memory was at the festive board, talking to the team about this new project. It was really exciting. Everybody had lots of different ideas, and we were getting to know each other. At one point, Darren leant over to me and said, Dan, what's your party piece? What's the one thing you do that wows? And I didn't quite understand what he meant, and I looked quite puzzled. He then said, well, do you do a tracing board, or have you learnt the charge? And I was pretty new to Freemasonry at this point. And I said, well, no, I'm sort of interested in the esoteric side, in the spiritualism and the symbolism of Freemasonry. And he looked back at me quite puzzled, and that showed the difference between me and Darren. He was really interested in the pomp and the ceremony and the ritual element and getting all of that perfect. And I was more interested in what lay behind all of that. However, it was just a brilliant time to sit, to talk to people, to evolve our ideas and to find out what they really wanted to create. And I was just looking forward to getting involved and becoming part of this team.
So we were called to a meeting by Darren. Now that the 4 committee members and he as the chairman had agreed the basis of a constitution, we were called to meet at Hertfordshire, where we would discuss some of the finer details, and it would be our first proper committee meeting.
At that initial meeting, there were all sorts of discussions. We went on different tangents about having leather ties and about a Latin motto. But at the end of the day, all of this was sort of way beyond where we were at that stage. What we wanted was a club to support members.
What was the Latin we were going for?
Audi vide tace. See, hear, remain silent. The words of the United Grand Lodge of England. that was drilled into us like I was back at school. Being told we need to have a motto, something that binds us together. A Latin motto would be the best thing.
We just didn't want, it didn't mean anything to us. That was not the concept of the club. So I was worried at this point because it just seemed that it was just going to be another club that is just going to not benefit the newer Masons coming in.
Darren came up with an idea. It was a very interesting idea. Freemasons wear their ties, but their ties always get soup or something spilt down them. So having a tie that could be cleaned quite easily, but distinctive from other Masonic ties which are traditionally black. So the idea of a white leather tie was presented. Needless to say, it didn't go down very well, and we quickly moved on, and the atmosphere became very formal, very directed. Part of what we had gathered to discuss was what should the logo of the club be.
As much as we all had great ideas and we knew what we wanted, Dan created the brand. The logo, the colouring, everything you see and you know that makes you think Fleet House Light Blues Club, that started growing from Dan's brain. And as much as he is a humble person and he doesn't want to necessarily talk about all of that, it is a key part of the growth of the club.
Dan got up and went into this full-on pitch about a badge on 5 points with a 33-degree angle on a light blue background with a white azure and a Hertfordshire heart with 7 antlers representing the 7 liberal arts and sciences. And it was at that point we all realised this is going to be the club logo. There's no further negotiation.
So at the committee meeting, I stood up and gave a presentation on how I felt the brand could come to life. There were already some ideas there of how the logo should look, but I'd cleaned it up and made it more traditional, more simple. It seemed to go down pretty well, everybody enjoyed it, and I'd also brought a photographer along with me to take some pictures around the building. These were going to be used for our flyers and our posters and our promotional material to try and get people to join the club. My other memory is a conversation about whether or not we should charge and whether or not the club should have a cost attached to it. I always felt that without a cost, people wouldn't see the value. So for me, it was really important that there was a cost, but it wasn't too prohibitive.
If we're wanting people to get cufflinks and ties and lapel pins, where does this money come from? And we discussed a join-in fee and then a yearly subscription.
At that meeting, I was more concerned, as I was the treasurer, about how we were going to raise some capital to do all of these things. So I suggested that we all put in 100 quid each, and then the province would put in 500 to match that.
We had looked at the different structures that were around. Middlesex were offering it for free, and they had hundreds of members, but it appeared that the majority of them weren't light blue. So we looked at the Connaught Club, and the Connaught Club charged a nominal amount for a year's membership, and then their events would be pay as you go. So we thought that would be a particularly good charging structure. Charge enough to give us a little bit of money in the bank that we can operate, we can send the packs out, we can engage our members, but not too much that they felt it was a pinch on the pocket. So after we had formalised some of the key elements as to where we were going, we agreed that email wasn't the best way of communicating because it wasn't as live. So we set up the WhatsApp committee group, which is still going today. It's been the same group from day one all the way through.
As soon as we had an idea, bang, it went onto the WhatsApp group. And WhatsApp was in its infancy at that time as well, so it wasn't a platform that I'd ever really come into contact before.
The early days of the WhatsApp group were brilliant. It was an abundance of ideas, messages left and right, and my phone was constantly pinging. There was a bit of a ban on sending messages in the middle of the night because some people were waking each other up. And so we had to kind of tame it a bit, but I felt like I was part of a community. I felt like I was on a journey with other people, and it was just really exciting.
So once the initial setup had begun, it was then time for the hard work. We had all been given our particular tasks. Dan and Neil were working on the website, making sure that we had all of our digital content ready, that when we went live, people could sign up, become members and see what was going on. Nick, as our inaugurating treasurer, was making sure that the bank account was set up, going through every possible detail, getting our signatory sorted, the battle that it is with the banks.
I was fixated on the bank account, which was a dreadful process to set up. And we needed an appropriate constitution, and we needed to jump through hoops. There were 4 of us that needed to turn up, and we needed to go to various different places to attempt to get this bank account sorted.
One of the main things that Dan and I really wanted to focus on was we just wanted the whole club just to be as modern as possible. And that came down to how you sign up to the club, how you pay membership, how you book in for events. We wanted it all digital because everyone here does everything on their phone. And that was very much when Dan and I started getting closer and understanding how each other tick, was the building of our website and integrating everything in a modern way.
My role at the time was PR, and it was all about marketing the club. We had some great photography taken at our first committee meeting, and that was on our flyers and our posters and other bits. I was also working at this point very closely with Neil Mottershead on the website, and we both had the same single vision: a digital first club. We didn't want paper forms and checks and things like that. We wanted our members to be able to really simply and easily sign up on the website and make their payment there.
Darren and I were agreeing the constitution and the final presentation that would be given to the province to make sure that we had full sign up and agreement from everything that would go forwards. We were also looking at what the membership engagement strategy would be for the club. Little did we know that behind the scenes, certain promises were being made by the chair to the province that we would hit financial targets, that we would make sure that we would have a minimum of 100 members signed up for our first event. And again, this is when some of the problems came.
There was always a sort of a nagging in the background from various lodges that I went to, and senior Masons were, there was very much an attitude of, why do you need this club when we have a support structure within each lodge?
Darren was also aware of a number of the issues that had come up in the presentation of the Light Blues Club that he didn't initially share with us. There was a lot of pushback from dark blue Freemasons about why we should have a Light Blues Club, that this would be wrong for lodges and there would be an erosion of the sanctity of individual lodges with this provincial initiative.
There were a number of dark blues in the province who were very vocal about the fact that they didn't like the idea of a Light Blues Club. They felt it was elitist. I never understood that, because for me, they had their own club. They were dark blues already. We wanted something for ourselves. But I guess when you're building a project, having a common enemy really helps your committee at times. And it did, it helped focus us. It helped us make sure everything we were doing was authentic. Everything we were doing was what we wanted for light blues across Hertfordshire.
I disagreed a lot with what was being presented, and I let that be known time after time, that we were a club for people that wanted to join us, not for people that wanted to stand against us. The idea of dark blues that had been through the chair, which was this magnificent feat that we were only dreaming of. They had been through the chair, they had experienced their Freemasonry, they were provincial or grand officers. But why should we care? We were losing light blue members. We were aware that people weren't getting to their third degree because they weren't being engaged with. We were aware that one of the biggest dropout rates for all of Freemasonry was immediately after the chair, because there was nothing for them to do. So we stood firm.
We must be getting towards the September now, and the provincial meeting is coming up. So we're positioning ourselves for a soft launch for the club.
We then had our committee meeting prior, and we were told that the Provincial Grand Master was going to make the Light Blues Club his keynote speech. That there was going to be a huge feature. He was going to encourage every light blue to sign up there and then.
The Fleet House Light Blues Club is the official Light Blues Club, and it was supposed to be mentioned on the second Rising.
And the image that we were given was that we would be in the Grand Temple at Freemasons Hall. The Provincial Grand Master would stand up, address the province, tell everybody, sign up to the Light Blues Club, do it outside.
And of course that doesn't happen, which left us feeling quite deflated.
It was so anticlimactic. We had our flyers, we had everything ready to go to kind of be, we are now taking memberships, and just nothing happened.
Not getting a mention at Provincial Grand Lodge after we'd put in so much effort to try and establish what the club should be was a real kick in the teeth. Now, looking back on it, I can understand. It was an unknown entity. There was no security behind it. There had been little to no provincial involvement right at the beginning. However, at the time, we had put in months of hard work. We had gone through every part of the process that we'd been asked to do. The committee had achieved every single task it was set.
There was far too much provincial politics or provincial ways of doing things that I didn't agree with. I did not see any benefit to having the province help build the club.
Not having a mention at the provincial meeting did affect the mood amongst the team. It started to pour fuel on a fire that was anti-province. But for me, it didn't bother me that much. I just felt that we needed to market ourselves to the Light Blues members across Hertfordshire. And the best way of doing that was via posters and flyers and social media. That was the way that we were going to engage and get new members to this club. The timing was perfect. We're invited to the new Young Masons Conference. This is held at the headquarters in London and would enable us to meet members up and down the country who were running clubs, and I guess give us an opportunity to talk about best practice. As a group, we decided that we would meet in the pub opposite just beforehand, and we got there, we had a couple of drinks, and we were talking about our club and what we wanted to do. But Darren doesn't show up. And I guess for me, it's the first time there started to be a feeling of separation between the younger guys on the committee and Darren.
When we arrive, we're a wee bit early, so we go and have a couple of drinks in a bar across the road, and then we go across. And actually, we're feeling very positive about ourselves. So we've got the bank account sorted out, and we've got a few members at this stage.
Oh, I do remember we did actually go in late, and then I got annoyed because I didn't have, we didn't get good seats because we were waiting for Darren to turn up, and he let us know quite late that he then wasn't coming.
The conference was great, really well organised, and some brilliant presentations from different clubs. What it did teach us was that we were in a better position than we thought we were. Lots of those clubs were still talking about bank accounts and websites. We had already done that. And for me, it all came alive at the question and answer session.
This guy jumped up and he said, "I'm going to set up a club in Hertfordshire."
And at that stage, we all jump up and say, "Look, we've already got one, actually."
Thank you for coming along. We've already got this going, and you've really kind of showed us that we're not marketing properly because you're unaware of it.
But this thing that we thought was being spoken about, that was being supported by the entire province, that everybody was aware of, because that's what we'd been told, was clearly a very isolated project. And it just demonstrated that we needed to do something to grow.
So there were clubs that were already established that had been going for years, and actually, we were in a really positive position. We had our bank account, we had our constitution, we had everything set up, and so we were feeling really positive that actually, we were striving ahead. Where some of the clubs, were really still talking about it. We were actually doing it.
We're set. As a committee, we've agreed who we are, what we're doing, how we're going to operate, and we know that the social side of Freemasonry is going to be a big driver. That's going to be the way in which we garner our members, we support them, we build friendships and relationships. So we agree that we're going to go out in Hertford as the namesake town of our province, a good place to launch in our social setting.
At that point, I worked in Hertford, and I'd been into the Snug a few times at lunch to try and do a bit of a recce. They had agreed to give us a small area on the night that we had booked, but my main concern really was, is anyone going to turn up?
I mean, actually, we were petrified that no one was going to turn up. We didn't really know what reach we had. And we were pretty green around the gills. And I remember Darren turning around and saying, well, what have they got on tap? What are they serving? And we didn't have a clue, to be honest. I mean, we were really just interested in getting a few guys to turn up at a bar.
The amount of questions that were asked in detail. What's on the menu? What are their alternative options? What beer is on tap?
Oh, Darren's questioning, it was relentless. What beer's on tap? What type of drink will people have? What food will there be? Where will we park? It was constant detail, and the rest of us were really just focused on creating a nice environment and looking to see if people would actually turn up to join our club. However, it did show that balance that Darren brought us in the detail element and making sure that this event was a success.
Darren really did draw us all together and kind of concentrate the thoughts. And I think without that in the early days, we would have struggled.
When we arrived, there weren't many people there that we recognised. Bear in mind, we didn't know many people in the province. Nobody really came over to our table, and we realised that actually we've got no idea if one person or 100 people are going to come through this bar. After about 15, 20 minutes, people began to trickle over and they realised who we were, and that was all nice.
A lot of the people we hadn't necessarily interacted with directly, it was word of mouth. So from the learnings we had taken away from Jay not knowing about the club, to then all of a sudden we've got these 30, 40 people there, definitely showed that we tweaked in the right direction.
It was brilliant to meet new people. These were the early members of the club, and they were really excited to find out what we were going to be doing, what events would be happening. The marketing had clearly worked, and this event was going to be a success.
But to see that group of people sort of forming, it really made us feel as if the club had a future.
Was our first event a success? At the time, we thought it was absolutely brilliant. We thought it couldn't have gone better. Looking back on it, it was awful. There was no planning, there was no real preparation. All of those questions that Darren was asking and wanted answers to, I'd ask them today. What beer is on tap? What is the type of food? What's the parking situation? How far do you have to go for parking? All of these questions that we didn't really care about were really relevant. And now I know when the club committee plans an event, they consider all of these questions. So we now needed to start looking at the inauguration of the club. We had agreed that we wanted to do a large-scale event, but in order to get there, we needed to plan it.
Dan and Tom just came over to my house. We still got everything done. We had an agenda, we had things we needed to talk about, but fundamentally we were sat on my sofa and on the floor, all had our laptops out working, and we ordered pizza.
It was a great time to be involved. It felt like the beginnings of a startup organisation. We were all sat round with laptops, talking, chatting, working, trying to make this thing come to life. And we were incredibly passionate about this project as well. Neil ordered some pizzas and they turned up, and as we were talking and eating and trying to get things working, it felt like a natural step for us to use that in our upcoming inauguration.
As the kind of evening went on, we just thought to ourselves, we've been very productive, but yet we've still managed to talk loads and we're all fed. So should we maybe take this kind of laid back, chilled concept and make our inauguration meeting a pizza party?
That was the driving force, what we wanted the inauguration to be. Those were the ideas that we put to paper, but they weren't the ideas that were approved.
It did get a lot of pushback from Darren as our chairman at the time, that he did not agree with our pizza party idea. For him, not everyone likes pizza. So he wanted a more formal event and we wanted more informal.
We just wanted to make something cool. And Darren had pushed back on our pizza idea, which we felt would be a great way of people turning up and being able to talk to each other and move around the room, etc., etc. He said, not everybody likes pizza. Who doesn't like pizza? Or at least at the time, that was our opinion. But he was so focused on impressing people in the province, and we were so focused on just creating something that was legendary. I was really worried about the relationship between Neil and Darren. They had started to go head to head in the WhatsApp group a number of times, and Darren had threatened to leave the committee. Tom and Nick did a really good job of peacemaking, but I think Neil and I were really strong-headed and we were really focused on what we wanted, and Darren felt like he was in the way.
The inaugural meeting, in many respects, was kind of taken out of our hands by Darren, and he was very much fixated on sort of impressing the powers that be. And we knew that we were going to have the provincial Grand Master, that was Paul Gower, and the most excellent Grand Superintendent, Jim Sharpley, who were the presidents of the newly formed club.
And effectively, we had been told what the inauguration was going to be, because that had been approved from on high. Latterly, we found out it hadn't been. But we were told to arrive at 3 o'clock. The inauguration would start at 6. We would have a brief committee meeting and then we would set up the room.
The setup of the room was very formal. It was round tables, it was seating plans, it was all the types of things that we didn't want.
We had advertised the inauguration as a fun, light-hearted engagement to the social side of Freemasonry, and it wasn't that. It was long presentations that focused more on recruiting people to join other orders than it was about educating people about the broad spectrum of Freemasonry.
We've gone from a really fun social that was completely informal to the complete opposite, where we were in essence at a festive board. You sat down, listening to people. I stood up and done a speech. Who wants to listen to me talk? I didn't want to listen to me talk. Everyone was bored. And I know they were, because I was talking.
My main memory of the meeting is lots of formal talks, lots of people giving speeches. And that isn't what we wanted. We wanted it to be informal. We wanted people to have the opportunity to get to know each other and just chat, really. And it felt like going forward, this might do us some damage because the people there would get the wrong opinion of what we wanted this club to be.
It was tense. There was a lot of angst between people as to this isn't the event that the 4 younger members of the committee wanted, and that we were doing what Darren wanted because he had agreed it with the province.
And I do remember one of the senior guys turning around to me and saying, "Nick, you need to keep Neil Motter's head in line."
I feel it did not represent the concept of what we wanted.
I do have fond memories of the inauguration. It was great to meet our members and see our club come to life. However, it wasn't quite the event that we wanted. Darren was shrewd though. He knew that we needed the backing of the province, and to enable some of those dark blues to step away and this club to go forward, that type of formal event gave them the confidence that we knew what we were doing.
And I personally think it did have a little bit of a hindrance on us in the growth of the club, and it took us a while for it to really kick back to the fun, because it wasn't fun. We should have had a pizza party.
I think Darren would be very proud of where the club is now. I think he had that vision as to where we were going to get to, and the rest of us were probably slightly too short-sighted to be able to see it. It now supports Freemasons in Hertfordshire in a way that I think Darren wanted, but in a way that we are all really happy with.
Yeah, I think Darren would be happy with the way that the club has turned out. I mean, he was right about many things that maybe we didn't give him the credit for in the early days.
I'm very proud in saying to people, "Oh, I'm going to the Burns night for the Light Blues Club," and when it's non-Masons, and I explain to them that I started this club and it's become this, and there's a kind of legacy that kind of comes with it. I am proud in what has been created.
I'm very proud of my contribution to this club. I'm even more proud that 10 years on from its inauguration, we're able to be here talking about what its future is, what its successes are, and how that will exist beyond any one person.
My proudest moment is working alongside the other committee members to make something from scratch. Looking back, we didn't have a club, we didn't have a way of engaging Light Blues members in Hertfordshire, and now we do.
I was a custodian of the club for a time, and I'm still involved as an honorary member, but it's down to the committee to keep things going, push things forwards. If in 50 years' time people are looking at the origins of the club, I hope they'll look back and see that I was one of the enthusiastic people that wanted this club to exist.
I really hope the club is still here in 50 years' time, and I hope the people in 50 years say that the founders worked incredibly hard to create something and work on a purpose for this club. This club exists to support Light Blue members, and I hope that it still does that in the future.
Yeah, looking back in 50 years' time, I think that people will say, "How is it possible that you got 3 provincial Grand Masters out of a group of founders?"
My advice for the next generation of committee members is to genuinely love this club as the founders did.
Don't steer it away from its fundamentals. Change it and adapt it to the right people, but don't lose your passion. If you're not passionate about it, there's nothing wrong with saying, "I've lost interest," and passing it on to the next person who has the interest. But you need that interest and passion, rather than being able to say you're the secretary or you're the chairman or you're the committee member of this so it looks good on your CV.
If I had a piece of advice for the current committee, it would be, don't use a scattergun approach. Do one thing very well rather than 10 things badly.
It's yours to take forward. It is yours to shape. What we did then probably won't be right now. So take it in your own direction, but remember the purpose. Support Light Blues Freemasons in Hertfordshire.
Neil Connolly came up with a wonderful term, and he referenced it, and we asked him what does he mean, and it was contumacy. And he said, people will see your behaviour and describe it as contumacy, but in reality it isn't that at all. It is new people trying new things to come to a new solution, not old people trying the same thing to get to a new solution.
If you're genuinely trying to create change, you need opposition. If you don't have opposition, that kind of tells you you're not creating enough change. And so for me, it galvanised us. It really put the committee on the front foot in wanting to create this change, but also to do something which they felt was right.
We definitely felt that we could do something for Hertfordshire to retain good people and to help them along their journey from their first step until however many steps they take after.
We hear it time and time again, it is a jewel in the crown of our province. And I think that's what not only the club needed, but what the province needed.
So I would encourage anyone to join the club. In fact, my son is going to be initiated in May, and I'm looking forward to having to pay for his membership. But at least he'll get out from under the old man's apron, as it were. And I think, to encourage anybody to, increase their Masonic experience.
I think Darren saw us as the delinquents of Freemasonry. He had to direct us where we needed it, but he did rule with an iron fist, but get the club to where it needed to be.
So I think Darren would have referred to us as naughty schoolboys, which I think in some respects is quite fair. I don't know that anyone would have done a better job as chairman in those early days.
From when we first met, I could not explain and I cannot forget. Baby, you're the one, you still turn me on. You can make me whole again. That is not going in.